Hello, it's the 14th of September, 2018, and this is episode 96 of the Unseen Podcast. This is your host, Paul Carr, and this is an unusual episode. I am by myself tonight, so this is what we might call a rant cast, although I will try not to rant too much. Tonight, we have once again failed to get an episode together after 4 weeks of preparation. I have largely been trying to leave it up to the community to prepare the topic and the discussion that gives us a running start on the episode. We didn't get there. Now, I don't want to point blame at anyone. I'm sure that lots of people had other things going on, and this is a Friday night. A lot of people like to do things on Friday night besides sit around at their desks and talk. I understand that. And for me, a family man, though, with teenagers, a Friday night is actually kind of a peaceful little enclave. But that's not true for everyone, and I understand that. So tonight, what this is going to be is kind of a meta episode where we talk about the podcast, where it's been, and if it has a future. If you're not familiar with the podcast today, this is probably not a good episode for you. It's probably going to bore you stiff in 5 minutes. This is for people who've been listening for a long time and people who have been on the panel, perhaps. There have been quite a few people on the panel, I'm guessing about 40. So that's for them too. And I am quite grateful to everyone who's participated and who has helped out and hosted even. And I am not abandoning the concept of the Unseen Podcast, but I do want to talk about what's worked and what hasn't, and what the prospects for the future are. If that's of no interest to you, I understand, and you can hit done now or stop now and go on to the next one. I do that a lot myself when I'm listening to podcasts. If I get a few minutes in and realize I'm not going to get much out of this, next podcast, please. And it doesn't really matter too much what the subject matter is. Just a question of, is this new to me? Is this interesting? Is it engaging? Or do I just want to get on to the next one? So I understand, and you can stop now. Okay, I'll wait for you. All right, you gone? All right. Okay, the rest, those of you who have hung on this long, we're almost 3 minutes into the podcast. You're going to want to know what's happening with the Unseen Podcast, but I'm going to start with a little history. Okay, I won't be long. I won't dwell on this, but the podcast started in April of 2015. Episode 1 had the physicist Mr. Tippett, whose name I keep wanting to say Keith Tippett, who's a pianist, but Dr. Tippett, I'll think of his first name later, was on, and it was actually a very good episode, and still one of our most popular. And we talked about the frontiers of physics, and it was fun. But before that, I had thought about the podcast for months. And the thing was, I had been doing the wow signal. I liked doing the wow signal. I wanted to continue doing the wow signal, but I had not had much listener engagement. I was not getting listeners to comment. I was not getting them to come on the show, which I had invited them to do. I was not getting very much going on at all with respect to listeners. And I kept asking myself, why are the listeners so silent? How can I pull them out of the woodwork and get something going on here with respect to them? I want the listeners to be involved. I want them engaged. I want to build a community. And so my idea was, well, I'll start a separate feed where listeners can come on and engage with the Unseen Podcast. Well, it wasn't called that yet. I'll give you that story in a moment. But engage with this new feed, this new podcast that will be a completely uncensored, unedited, unscripted, and anyone who wants to weigh in on the podcast can. Anyone who wants to appear on the podcast, if they're willing to make a little effort, not a lot, a little effort, they can be on the podcast. They don't have to be subject matter experts. They just have to have questions. And that was the concept. The concept was, let's try a completely open participation. Well, I should say completely open. You have to speak English reasonably well. Fortunately, in our planet at this point in time, a whole lot of people speak English. So that's not a big barrier. I'm a little bit embarrassed that I can't really do one in another language. I would encourage people to try that in their language, whether it's Spanish or Flemish or Arabic, whatever it is. Just, try it. Give it a shot. But anyway, the only requirement was you had to speak English, and you had to have a little bit of skin in the game. That is, you had to come in before the episode and engage in a discussion about what the episode should be about. And then after you've done that, if you invested that half hour, a minute, an hour of your time kind of hashing out what the podcast should be about, and you come on and spend another hour or two of your time talking on, yes, a Friday night. Now, I know that's not ideal for everyone. And also, the time we picked is certainly not ideal for people who live in Europe. And it's just barely okay for people who live on the West Coast of the United States. It's perfect for me. So, all right. So, this is my podcast, so I get to pick a time that's good for me. Anyway, we haven't always been at 10 o'clock on Friday night, but when I have tried other times, other dates, I haven't had a lot of response. So I stuck with it. Now, here is what happened. I initially got a good response, and I got a decent number of downloads for a brand new podcast. And I was pretty encouraged. This was in the spring of 2015 with episode 1. And we did better and better and better. But we were doing it every week, and it was stressful for me. It was a lot of preparation to get one together every Friday night. Now, we had good panelists. We had good guests. We have guests maybe every 3 or 4 episodes. That's sort of the formula. Maybe every 5 episodes. We had, we had Ben Tippett. Ben was his name. And then a few episodes later, we had Hiroja Shai. We had Andrea Ciolas, Brian Kuberline, Pamela Gay, great guest. We had some people from Mars One, Ryan McDonald, Diane McGrath, and Oscar Matthews. We had Tim Shank, who you probably never heard of, would not have ever heard of without us. We had C. Webb and David Flora on the Cryptids podcast, which was one that James Garrison hosted. And I that worked really well. It was a lot of fun. We had James Muncie a couple weeks later. That was all going well, but it was hard to get it together every week. So sometime around, I think it was 2016. Is that true? Let's see. I'm looking at the chart now. Yeah, it was right around April of 2016. I said, look, I got to go to every other week. I can't do more than every other week. At that time, I was still very optimistic. It seemed like the audience was increasing, the panel pool, the number of people who were available to participate in the panel was increasing. We were still getting new people in panels. So this was about 2.5 years ago. And I said, well, we can do this. We can make this happen. And yeah, it looked like it was going to happen. But then sometime around, I don't know, last year, 2017, it started falling off. We weren't getting new people in the panel pool. Our downloads were down. We weren't still getting almost no listener engagement except for people in the panel pool. I mean, it was real. Listener engagement was poor from the beginning, and it's poor now. I'm not sure that I'm sure there are things that can be done about that. I just don't know what they are, and I don't have time to make them happen, even if I did know what they were. So listener engagement, very poor. We weren't getting comments. We weren't getting emails. We weren't getting anyone who said, hey, let me come on the show because I disagree with what you said last week. And so, that didn't happen. We were getting maybe one new panelist a year or every 6 months, maybe. It was disappointing. And a lot of our older panelists were not coming back. So we had pretty much the same people. Actually, I should say the same men on every show. Very few women, very few young people. And it was a very bland set of people coming on show after show after show every 2 weeks. Not that those people are to blame. They were doing the best they could. But we just did not get this kind of broad participation that I was hoping to get. And then, so now here we are, and in the last few months, it's been really hard to get a panel together every 2 weeks. It's been really hard to get the topic discussion going at all, even though typically it's 5 or 6 weeks advance notice. And we even have problems with people who are not even aware of the basic procedures, even though they're all written down and available. So we have problems. We had a good discussion with Chad Davies in what was that? In February. I enjoyed that very much. And then since then, we've been really struggling to get it going. It's been a few months now. No, I know summer is slow. I expected that. I even took some weeks off, figuring, okay, let people go on vacation in summer and not worry about being on a podcast. People, it's only a few hours of work at most, and it's not that hard a job to do. You don't have to write anything down. You don't have to do much research, if any. You just have to show up, basically. Show up, think, talk. But anyway, the result was that I think we're now at a point where it doesn't seem to be a path forward. We don't seem to have any growth, any interest, any energy, and I'm concerned that maybe the podcast is at an end. So I thought of several options, several ways to make it better. Most of the things I think of, I know will not work. Why? Because that's how history is with me. I always think of a lot of things, and most of them are not workable. So the way to get things to work is to get people to get behind it and participate, and put their shoulder to the wheel and say, yeah, I will help you make that work. Well, I'm not saying no one has done that, but it's not been enough people, and it's not been consistently done. So let's go back to the original concept. The concept was that if you want to be on the panel, I don't care who you are, as long as you speak English reasonably well, you can be on the panel. You don't have to be a subject matter expert. You can help us steer what the subject will be. Even if we have a special guest on, you can help come up with the questions for that special guest, and you can help us understand where the topic should go. And sometimes this has worked really, really well. And I want to say that there are a lot of episodes. This is number 96. I would say at least 40 or 50 that I'm really happy with. And the ones I'm not happy with were still worth doing because they helped us work through some things that we needed to work through and understand, oh yeah, we don't know what we're talking about. We need to, we need to move on to, and do some work and get on top of this. So, that has been something that I am pleased with. I think we've accomplished something. But I think we're to the point now where we may not have much accomplishment in the future, or no one will listen to it. Downloads are a little bit hard to compare because my host, Libsyn, in October of last year went to a different way of accounting for downloads. But it's pretty clear we're still, even with that taken into account, we're not getting anywhere near as many downloads as we were 2 years ago. In the 3.5 years that we've been doing this podcast, the downloads did seem to peak sometime around late 2016. Here we are 2 years later, and we're just not getting there. The most popular episode we ever did was episode 61, more than 30 episodes ago. And that one was Adam Smith and I talking about Tabby Star. And no special guests, just Adam Smith and I talking about Tabby Star. We've done some other ones that are pretty popular. Episode 65, it was myself, Marsha Barnhart, Sam Lichtenstein, David Grigg, and who else? Nick Nielsen talking about alien megastructures. That did well. The one right after that did well, with just myself, Sam Lichtenstein, and Chris Prophet. That one was one of our most popular as well. We have had excitement about some of the things we were talking about. At one point, I even joked we would change the name of the podcast to Aliens and Rockets, because if we talked about aliens or rockets, we seem to get the most engagement. But by engagement, I don't mean really engagement. I mean just downloads. People silently voting with their smartphones saying, yeah, give me that one. But they hardly ever came back to us and say, hey, just say good episode. I enjoyed it. It'll take you 5 seconds. Nobody even did that. We got a few iTunes reviews. Thank you for those of you who did that. I think we have one Patreon subscriber. Well, I haven't really made a big deal about Patreon, but thank you, nevertheless. We have a bunch of people who have volunteered to host over the years. Now, there has not been a host other than myself since June of 2017. Again, I'm grateful to people who did volunteer to host, but nobody new stepped up and said, hey, I can host once in a while. I can host once a year, once every 6 months. Nobody did that. And even though I made all the resources available to do it without being a technical expert on how to do podcasting. And so, I was stuck with doing it every 2 weeks. Now, I don't mind doing it. I enjoy doing it, but it's nice to have a vacation once in a while, and usually I'm on the panel when I'm not hosting. So it's not like I'm running away. I just prefer that someone else handle the responsibilities once in a while. It's not that much work. It's a few hours of effort over a period of about a month. So, and I do all the technical stuff still. I do all the post-processing and uploading and managing the show notes and so on. So hosting is easy, but I haven't had many volunteers since, I think the last one was, let's see, it was Adam Smith in June of 2017. Adam's done, I think, 3 or 4 of those, to which I'm grateful, because Adam is in a really bad time zone for doing this sort of thing. And we've had David Grigg, we've had Sam Lichtenstein, we've had James Garrison, and I think that's pretty much all we've had for guest hosts, or, well, I shouldn't say guest hosts, they're just hosts. And I am grateful to those people who have done that. I wish more people would step up. I wish we had more people coming into the panel pool. I have been on social media. I've done all kinds of things. And so I've come to the conclusion, which, by the way, again, no one should take this personally. It's about me. I have failed to make an open participation podcast happen. I do not want anyone to think that an open participation podcast can't work. It's impossible. I don't want anyone to think that. I just think that Paul Carr is not good at this. That's really the reality. I have the charisma of a stale potato chip. I just do not get people engaged, excited. I was hoping that just the idea alone would be enough to get people excited. And some people are excited by ideas, but most people are not. They need a personality. And I can't provide that in the quantity and quality that they require to come in and engage and expend their energy. And fine, I understand that. And so I'm not good at this. So where do we go from here? Is it possible to keep this podcast going? Well, I think right now, given the lack of any energy coming from outside, the answer is no. Here's a couple of possibilities that I will raise, and I hope that some of you will listen to this and say, yeah, I should run with that. I should be involved. So here's one. One is that the podcast keeps going, but I am no longer the producer. Someone else steps in, takes over, gets it moving forward, and while keeping the same basic principles, is free to change anything underlying that, whether it's social media platforms, whether it's website, and certainly who hosts, which would be me very rarely, if ever. And the topics could vary, things could change a lot. But the basic idea of an open participation podcast would live on, and the Unseen podcast would grow and prosper and get listener engagement and have, lots of comments on its website and lots of Patreon subscribers, and more power to you if you can make that happen. I am not the person that can make that happen or really at all interested in making that happen at this point. Another possibility is, since this podcast was spun off from the WOW signal, that we'd spin it back in. And really that's what I'm leaning towards at the moment, that the people we have who have been active panelists would, I'd say, in touch with them. And from time to time, not every 2 weeks, but from time to time, when we're doing this magazine format for the WOW signal, we would have a panel discussion. Now, here, instead of the panel being charged with picking the topic, I would pick the topic. And I would also, for the most part, pick the panelists. I pretty much do that now, but I have criteria that allow anyone to be on the panel if they meet those criteria, and they are not terribly strict criteria, by the way. So we could have, we might get Nick Nielsen and Sam Lichtenstein and James Garrison and David Grigg together for half an hour, maybe 20 minutes to talk about a particular topic. Now, would it be unedited? No, it would be edited for brevity. And I might they might talk for an hour, but I might only use 20, 30 minutes of it. That's fine. But it still gives me that sense of that it's just not just me talking. And we also have other people who have contributed to the Unseen podcast, like James Garrison, like Daniela DePaulis, like Mike Mongo. And I would encourage them to continue. And, I will take the audio they generate and make something of it. And that's the kind of podcast that I want the wow signal to be, but it's more tightly controlled. It's more edited. It's more thematic. And it's not just the open discussion that we have. Now, let's back up and ask why. Okay. Why the Unseen Podcast? Why did I want to do that? Well, I'd already mentioned I wanted more engagement. I was hoping to get listeners engaged by bringing them onto panels. But the reality was that as I saw it, I wanted to have these conversations about topics that absolutely fascinate me personally. And I wanted to have these deep discussions. I mean, this goes back to like middle school, where you would be up at a sleepover and to 3 o'clock in the morning, you're talking about the existence of God or the meaning of life and stuff like that. Well, you know, we're adults now. We can probably get beyond some of those topics that don't have much content and onto things that are really interesting. But, you know, we still have that impulse to stay up all night and talk about these deep topics. And that's really what there are conversations I felt I wanted to have and I wasn't having in everyday life. And so I was enlisting people all around the world to join me in those conversations. And that was kind of the wow signal I started because I wanted an excuse to call up people like Seth Shostak or, a whole bunch of people and whose names are eluding me right now, and have these conversations with them about these things that fascinated me. And, you know, so Jeffrey Landis is an example. He has this is a man who has a lot of ideas about a lot of things, or David Grinspoon. And I just wanted to get in sideways on the conversation by saying, we'll put on a podcast and record it, and hundreds of people, maybe even thousands, will listen to it. And that's happened. That has happened. And I was surprised at how many people were willing to be on the wow signal. People whose books I'd read, whose articles I'd read, who I presume were very busy and had tremendously rewarding personal lives as well. And, you know, they probably do. But they found time for my podcast, you know, once a year or so. That was great. And the same thing as on the Unseen Podcast, except I didn't require that they be someone whose book I'd read or whose article I'd read or who had a great podcast or whatever. I just wanted them, it could be anyone who had opinions and ideas and questions, especially questions, burning questions. That's where I wanted to go. Because, you know, I'm not a famous author or scientist or someone whose ideas are rattling the world. I just want someone who wants to ask questions and have these conversations. And the vision that I had was sitting in this darkened room, which is where I am now, in my pod cave in the basement of my house, and my microphone close to my mouth and my headphones over my ears, and someone thousands of miles away and I were talking about whether or not there were alien civilizations in the galaxy or any of a myriad other topics that I think many of these topics we'll never know the answer within our lifetimes, but they're great mental lenses. They focus us down on a lot of key questions that we do need to think about. And so that's where I am. That's what I wanted to do. And I think there were times on the Unseen Podcast when we got there, we were doing that. And I'm very grateful to this podcast and the people who have participated in it for making that happen in good faith. And that was wonderful. And I want that to continue, but I want it to be more reliable, more, I don't know what the word I'm looking for here. I don't want it to be so much work to get so little out. And then, I just don't think that I can foster a community like some people can. And that fostering of a community, that charisma, that leadership, that likableness that you need to build a community around a podcast, I don't have that. And that's okay. I don't think that's the only thing you have to have or the only thing you can have. But I'm going to have to admit that the Unseen podcast isn't working. So that's option 2. I spin it into the WOW signal. I occasionally have podcast panel discussions, kind of like we did in the Unseen podcast, but a little bit more under control conditions. Is there an option 3? Yes, but it's extremely improbable. And that is, we continue doing what we're doing. People say, oh, I guess I should get involved. And I'm talking to you, the listener, right now. I should get involved. I should go over to that community. Yeah, I don't like Google Plus, but who cares? I just have to go in one community, and there's nothing about it that doesn't work well. I make comments, I share things, and once in a while, maybe once every 3 or 4 times a year, maybe not even that much, I appear in a panel. But when even I'm not appearing on a panel, I'm contributing my ideas, and I'm encouraging other people to participate, and I'm bringing my friends with me. If you can do that, then, and if there's just like 10 of you out there listening right now who can do that, the podcast will probably continue. I won't make a firm decision until we've made one more shot at it. We have another session scheduled for September 28th. If that goes well, and I'm seeing an uptick in engagement from the participants community, not even from the listeners, just from the participants, people saying, yeah, I think we should keep this podcast going, and I'm going to invest a little bit of my time in that. And I'm not talking to people who've already invested a lot of time. They've done enough. Someone new needs to step up. And that's you. Yeah. No, not you. You. Yeah. And I want you to think about it. Do you have a couple hours a week you can spend in a topics discussion? And then on Friday night at 10 o'clock Eastern, can you sit down for an hour or two? And by an hour or two, I mean, can you sit down and, you can leave after the first hour, or you can come in after the first hour, because we're trying to structure it that way. And, new panelists are great. The only thing is, I don't want you to come into the conversation and say, what are we talking about tonight? I hate that. I hate it. You got to show up aware of where we're going with this particular episode, this particular recording session, because you've been involved in the conversation. And, so do that. If you want, if there's 10 of you out there, 5 of you, that would be enough to keep the podcast going. But right now, I'm not seeing this growth that I need to see. I'm not seeing this improvement. I'm seeing a shrinkage. And it's very discouraging. And I'm thinking that maybe my time would be better spent. I could get those same conversations in other ways. And I could have, this time and this energy that I'm putting into this could be much better spent on the WOW signal, which is in a lot of ways a better podcast that has been languishing for lots of reasons, but partly because of the energy I'm not putting into it that I'm putting into the Unseen podcast. And so, and this is partly, me, because being a procrastinator and being, having a low interest threshold and taking on too much, but I'm letting the WOW signal suffer, because it's like the 19th priority in my life. If it moved up to the 18th, it might get a little more time. So, as always, the show notes for this will be on unseenpodcast.com. This one will have very, very short show notes. And if you have comments or questions, you can go to unseenpodcast.com and drop your comment there, or we are on Twitter at Podcast Unseen, or you can go to the Google Plus community, join the community. Almost everybody gets in who asked to join. There are some exceptions, but you know what kind of person I'm talking about. And then we will be happy to talk to you. And even if you don't want to be on a panel this week or next month, if you engage, if you get involved, if you comment, if you think about it, if you put things in the form of a question, which, by the way, is far better than a dogmatic statement, trust me on that, we'll be happy to work with you, and you'll get on a panel. You can even host the show. I prefer that people that host the show have been on once or twice before, so that they we know who they are. But I've been very happy that everyone's just guest hosted on the show. And so I think I'll wrap this up by sort of going back over the episodes we've had. And I want to specifically thank all the special guests. So let's start again with Ben Tippett, Hiroja Shibe, not her real name, but she knows who she is. Andreas Ciolis, Brian Koberline, Pamela Gay, Ryan McDonald, Dan McGrath, Oscar Matthews, Tim Schenk. We should have him back sometime, see how he's doing, but, well, that's up to you. C. Webb and David Flora, James Munsey, Bob Novella of Skeptic's Guide to the Universe, Lee Irons, who's the father of Morgan Irons, who was our guest the very following week, Madison Campbell, a young scientist, Fraser Kane, a successful science podcaster, at least by my standards, Jake Robbins, ditto, Eva Bodman, who helped us understand Tabby Star better, and our second anniversary of Tabby Star paper, Paul Hildebrandt, who does some interesting stuff, Chad Davies, whose podcast, The Scientific Odyssey, I strongly recommend. Those are our guests. I'm going to recognize a few panelists. Certainly Nick Nielsen, who's been on more shows than anyone except for myself. Sam Lichtenstein, who was a great addition to our panel pool. Sam always has some bright, interesting things to say. Adam Smith, David Grigg, one of my favorite panelists, who's also hosted the show a few times. James Garrison, who always brings his sense of humor, down-to-earth Oklahoma accent. And James is pretty smart, too. He has some things to say. Mike Bowler always has some fun things to talk about with respect to the conspiracy world. Mateusz Macias, we haven't seen him in a while, but we do like him. From Poland, Daniela De Paulus, Mike Mongo, world famous Hollywood mogul, or something like that. Patrick Festa, who's been on a number of times, and he's not a scientist, but he's a science enthusiast. Well, let's see. Marcia Barnhart was on a lot of the early episodes. Who else do I want to recognize? Been on a lot of episodes. Chiro Villa, one of our favorite panelists. Chiro had an interruption. I think he's kind of back now. He's got his man cave back together in Florida. Chiro is always welcome to come on the show. See, we had Geeta Jaisingani, who didn't come on very often, but we always liked having her on. Buck Field, who always was someone who likes to challenge orthodoxy. And, well, let's see. Those are, I think I caught all the people that are on frequently. Of course, the plan was always to have a lot of different panelists, so that nobody was on all the time. I'd also like to thank Ted Rowe, who was kind of a guest / panelist for episode 38. And am I missing somebody? Liam Ginty, who was a guest / panelist on episode 51. And, Morgan Renberg, who was on episode 56. Roger Webby, who was on a number of episodes in the start of the 50s and 60s of numbers. And, okay, so that's kind of where I'm going to end that. There were other panelists as well. Who, if you know who you are, John Ekberg, I'm looking through the list here. Ryan McDonald, a good panelist as well as a good guest. And well, if I didn't mention your name, don't feel left out. I just not going to get everyone. There's been quite a few. Lossert Planer, certainly want to recognize him. TJ Mulick was only on once, but an old APL buddy of mine, and Michael Cornett. He was only on once, but I was kind of hoping he would come back. So anyway, this is episode 96 of the Unseen Podcast. Whether there's an episode 97 is up to you. Let me know what you think. Please weigh in, and maybe there's some ideas that I haven't thought of. You have some. So let's hear from you. Otherwise, we'll give it another go on September 28th and see where it goes from there. This has been the Unseen Podcast, the unscripted, uncut, and open participation podcast from Dream of the Open channel. For more information, including show notes for this episode, please visit unseenpodcast.com. You can also follow us on Twitter @PodcastUnseen. If you are interested in joining one or more panels on this podcast, then you can. No subject matter expertise or podcasting experience is required, and we're always eager to add new panelists. Just email unseenpodcast@gmail.com and we'll get you started. The Unseen Podcast is produced by Paul Carr and is released under the Creative Commons Attribution Share-alike license. Music is by DJ Spooky.
You're alone in the car. You don't know why. You're just not sure. There was something up there, something out there. You heard it. You saw the eyes. It was 10 p.m. It was Friday night. The radio was on. It was Desert Oracle Radio on KCDZ 107.7 FM.
Desert Oracle Radio, the voice of the desert.